Russia's economy is showing signs of severe strain as multiple factors converge, suggesting that it may be on the brink of collapse. A combination of international sanctions, a decreasing energy export revenue, and the significant costs associated with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine have put immense pressure on the country's financial stability.
Firstly, thank you for watching, and don't forget to smash that like, subscribe, and notification bell for more global finance uncovered, as we continue to work hard and around the clock to always deliver and improve on our content for you. We would greatly appreciate your additional support by you clicking the like button, notification bell, and subscribe button and joining our channel's growth.
The Russian ruble has been in free fall, hitting record lows against the US dollar, signaling the loss of investor confidence in the nation's economy. This devaluation has exacerbated inflation, making basic goods increasingly unaffordable for the average Russian citizen. One of the most significant contributors to Russia's economic woes is the sharp decline in energy export revenues. As one of the world's largest producers of oil and natural gas, Russia has long relied on these commodities to fund its government and stabilize its economy. However, global efforts to reduce dependence on Russian energy, especially in Europe, have drastically reduced demand. The imposition of price caps on Russian oil, spearheaded by Western nations, has further slashed profits, leaving the country struggling to find alternative markets willing to pay a premium. The impact of international sanctions cannot be overstated. These punitive measures, imposed by Western countries in response to Russia's actions in Ukraine, have severely restricted the nation's access to global financial markets. Major Russian banks have been cut off from the SWIFT international payment system, making it difficult for them to conduct transactions and access foreign currencies. Additionally, the freezing of Russian assets held abroad has further constrained the government's ability to stabilize the economy through financial intervention. The cost of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine is another critical factor draining Russia's economic resources. Military expenditures have soared as the war drags on, requiring significant financial outlays for equipment, personnel, and logistics. Additionally, the war has led to increased social spending to support soldiers' families and address the rising unemployment caused by the economic downturn. These costs are unsustainable in the long term and have forced the government to dip into reserves that were initially intended to safeguard against economic shocks. Domestically, the economic situation is dire for ordinary Russians. The sharp devaluation of the ruble has led to skyrocketing prices for imported goods, while wage growth has stagnated. The resulting inflationary pressures have eroded purchasing power, leading to widespread discontent. Moreover, the government's attempts to control inflation through interest rate hikes have further stifled economic activity by making credit more expensive for businesses and consumers alike. The manufacturing sector in Russia is also under severe strain. Many industries rely on imported machinery and components, which have become prohibitively expensive or altogether unavailable due to sanctions. This disruption has led to a sharp decline in industrial output, contributing to rising unemployment and a shrinking GDP. The inability to replace lost imports with domestically produced alternatives has exposed the vulnerability of Russia's economy to external shocks. The agricultural sector, once a bright spot in the Russian economy, is now facing significant challenges as well. Sanctions have disrupted the supply of critical inputs such as fertilizers and machinery, leading to reduced crop yields. Additionally, the loss of key export markets in Europe has further strained the sector, forcing farmers to sell their produce at lower prices in less lucrative markets. This downturn in agriculture is likely to exacerbate food insecurity within the country, compounding the overall economic crisis. Foreign investment in Russia has all but dried up as investors flee the country in search of safer havens. The uncertainty surrounding the war in Ukraine, combined with the deteriorating economic situation, has made Russia an unattractive destination for foreign capital. The exodus of multinational corporations from the Russian market has also led to the loss of jobs and technology transfers, further hampering economic growth. This lack of investment is a significant impediment to any potential recovery in the near term. Russia's financial sector is also grappling with the fallout from the economic crisis. The collapse of the ruble and the loss of access to international markets have put immense pressure on Russian banks, many of which are now facing solvency issues. The government has been forced to step in to provide liquidity to struggling banks, but this has only added to the fiscal burden. As confidence in the banking system erodes, there is a growing risk of a banking crisis that could further destabilize the economy. Russia's economy is facing a perfect storm of challenges that threaten to push it toward collapse. The combined effects of declining energy revenues, international sanctions, the financial burden of the war in Ukraine, and domestic economic mismanagement have created a situation that is increasingly unsustainable. Without significant changes in policy or a resolution to the conflict in Ukraine, the prospects for Russia's economy appear bleak, with potentially severe consequences for the Russian population and the global economy.
As Russia's economic situation continues to deteriorate, the government's efforts to mitigate the crisis appear increasingly desperate. President Vladimir Putin's administration has implemented various measures aimed at stabilizing the ruble and shoring up public confidence. However, these efforts have largely been stopgap solutions, failing to address the underlying structural issues plaguing the economy. The introduction of capital controls, for instance, has temporarily slowed the ruble's decline, but at the cost of further isolating Russia from the global financial system. Additionally, the central bank's intervention to support the ruble through currency reserves has been met with skepticism, as these reserves are rapidly depleting. The strain on Russia's economy is also manifesting in the labor market, with industries struggling under the weight of sanctions and reduced access to global markets. Unemployment is rising steadily. This increase is particularly pronounced in sectors heavily reliant on foreign technology and components, such as the automotive and aerospace industries. As companies lay off workers or cut hours, the social fabric of the country is fraying. This situation is leading to an increase in poverty rates, as more Russians find themselves unable to make ends meet. The government's attempts to offset this through social spending have been insufficient, given the scale of the economic downturn. The agricultural sector's struggles have sparked concerns about food security within Russia, as the availability of critical imports like seeds, fertilizers, and machinery decreases. Crop yields have suffered. The government's attempt to compensate by promoting domestic production has had limited success, due to the long lead times and significant investment required to scale up agricultural output. Furthermore, climate change and unpredictable weather patterns have added another layer of complexity, threatening future harvests. With food prices rising sharply, many Russians are finding it increasingly difficult to afford basic necessities, heightening social tensions. Energy exports, once the backbone of Russia's economy, are now a double-edged sword. While Russia continues to sell oil and gas to countries like China and India, these markets demand significant discounts due to their leverage over Russia's limited options. The discounted prices, coupled with the costs of redirecting supplies away from Europe, have severely reduced the profitability of these exports. Moreover, the global shift toward renewable energy sources and increased energy efficiency is expected to further erode demand for Russian fossil fuels over the coming years. This decline represents a long-term threat to Russia's economic stability, as the country struggles to diversify its economy away from its heavy reliance on energy exports.
The technological isolation imposed by sanctions is having a profound impact on Russia's innovation and development capabilities. Many Russian industries, particularly in high-tech sectors, are heavily dependent on Western technology, both in terms of hardware and software. With access to this technology cut off, these industries are facing a significant slowdown. This situation is particularly concerning in the defense sector, where the inability to procure advanced components is affecting Russia's military capabilities. The decline in technological advancement is also evident in civilian sectors, with companies struggling to maintain productivity and innovation without access to the latest tools and technologies. The financial strain is also evident in Russia's foreign exchange reserves, which have been significantly depleted in attempts to stabilize the economy. Initially, Russia's substantial reserves were seen as a buffer against economic shocks, but the rapid drawdown to defend the ruble and finance the government's expenditures has diminished this safety net. The central bank's options are becoming increasingly limited, and there's growing concern that a further depletion of reserves could leave Russia vulnerable to a full-blown financial crisis. As reserves dwindle, the government may be forced to resort to more drastic measures, such as printing money, which would likely lead to hyperinflation. The deteriorating economic situation is also having a pronounced impact on Russia's population demographics. Emigration has surged, particularly among young professionals and skilled workers who see limited future prospects in the country. This brain drain is depriving Russia of the talent necessary to drive future economic growth and innovation. The exodus of skilled workers is particularly damaging in the context of an aging population, which already poses significant challenges for the country's long-term economic stability. As the workforce shrinks and the dependency ratio increases, the burden on the remaining working population will only grow, exacerbating the economic crisis.
The sanctions and economic isolation are also leading to a reshuffling of Russia's trading relationships. With Western markets largely closed off, Russia has increasingly turned to China, India, and other non-Western countries for trade. However, these new trading relationships are often on less favorable terms, with Russia forced to offer significant discounts or agree to unfavorable conditions. This shift is also leading to a greater dependence on a narrow set of trading partners, which increases Russia's vulnerability to economic coercion. The loss of diversified trade routes and the imposition of unfavorable terms are further weakening Russia's economic position. The Russian government's efforts to increase economic self-sufficiency, often referred to as import substitution, have met with mixed success. While there has been some progress in developing domestic alternatives to imported goods, the scale and speed of these efforts have been insufficient to compensate for the loss of access to global markets. In many cases, domestic products are of lower quality and higher cost compared to their imported counterparts, leading to inefficiencies and further economic strain. The lack of access to foreign investment and technology is also hindering the development of competitive industries, leaving Russia increasingly isolated from the global economy. Russia's debt situation is becoming increasingly precarious. Although the country has historically maintained relatively low levels of external debt, the economic crisis has forced the government to increase borrowing to finance the budget deficit. The imposition of sanctions has also made it difficult for Russia to roll over its existing debt or issue new bonds in international markets. As a result, the government is increasingly reliant on domestic borrowing, which is putting pressure on the domestic banking sector. The risk of a sovereign debt crisis is growing, especially if the government is unable to stabilize the economy or find alternative sources of revenue. The social contract between the Russian government and its citizens is under strain as the economic crisis deepens. For years, the government has maintained public support through a combination of economic stability and nationalist rhetoric. However, as the economic situation deteriorates, public dissatisfaction is growing. Protests have erupted in various parts of the country, and the government's efforts to suppress dissent are becoming more heavy-handed. The risk of social unrest is increasing, particularly if the government is unable to address the economic challenges facing the country. The potential for widespread protests or even civil unrest is a growing concern for the Kremlin.
Russia's economy is also being affected by the broader global economic environment. The slowdown in global economic growth, particularly in key markets like China and Europe, is reducing demand for Russian exports. Additionally, the tightening of global financial conditions is making it more difficult for Russia to access international credit markets. The combination of domestic economic challenges and a difficult global environment is creating a perfect storm that is pushing Russia's economy toward collapse. The potential for a global recession adds another layer of complexity, as reduced global demand could further exacerbate Russia's economic woes. In the face of these mounting challenges, the Russian government's options are becoming increasingly limited. While there have been calls for economic reforms to address the structural issues facing the country, the political will to implement such reforms appears to be lacking. The government's focus on maintaining control and suppressing dissent is taking precedence over economic modernization and diversification. As a result, the prospects for a meaningful economic recovery appear dim. Without significant changes in policy or a resolution to the conflict in Ukraine, Russia's economy is likely to continue its downward spiral, with potentially severe consequences for both the Russian population and the broader global economy.
Thank you for watching, and don't forget to smash that subscribe, like, and notification bell for more global finance uncovered.